Chapter 1 of Bunny Cottontail Jr. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Julianne Thompson. Bunny Cottontail Jr. by Laura Rountree Smith. To a small house in the woods, a little rabbit came. Then said Bunny Cottontail, "I wish I knew your name." Chapter 1. One winter evening, Bunny and Susan Cottontail were sitting before the fire, warming their paws. "Oh dear, oh dear!" cried Susan Cottontail. "Why, what is the matter?" asked Bunny. "Have you lost your glasses?" Oh dear," said Susan again. "We are growing old, Bunny, and we have no little cottontails for company." "Where are all our grandchildren?" asked Bunny Cottontail. "Where is Snubby Nose? Where is Bunny Bright Eyes?" Oh dear," said Susan. "I wish we had a little rabbit that would live with us always." Just then they heard something. "What is that?" cried Bunny. "What is that?" cried Susan. It was a little voice they heard. "Somebody come quick! Somebody come quick!" it called. Bunny Cottontail went to the front door, and out in the yard he saw a little rabbit, half buried in a snowdrift. Bunny ran out and picked up the little rabbit and carried him into the house. He set him down before the fire. "Well, who are you?" asked Bunny Cottontail. "And where did you come from?" asked Susan. "How did you get here?" asked Bunny Cottontail. "Are you hungry?" asked Susan. The little rabbit stood quite still. He did not answer at all, but blinked his eyes and waved his long ears to and fro. "Perhaps he is deaf and dumb," said Susan. "Perhaps his tongue is frozen," said Bunny Cottontail. Just then, the strange little rabbit jumped closer to the fire and burned his paw on the hot bricks of the hearth. Then he set up a howl. Bunny and Susan were busy, you may be sure. They got liniment and flour and put them on the burned paw and bound it up. "He is not deaf and dumb," said Bunny Cottontail with a twinkle in his eye. Then the little rabbit began to talk very fast. "I don't know who I am," he said, "but someone put me into a basket and I jumped out and ran away." "My fur and whiskers! It is a cold night to run away," said Bunny Cottontail. "What is your name?" asked Susan Cottontail. The little rabbit shook his head. "I don't know," said he. "We must find you a name," said Susan, and she put on her spectacles and began reading names from the dictionary. Suddenly, Bunny Cottontail set up a shout. He laughed so hard that Susan looked at him sharply over her spectacles. What do you suppose made Bunny Cottontail laugh? "I have a name for this little fellow," he cried. "We will call him Bunny Cottontail Jr." "Of course," cried Susan. "He looks like you, and he has burned his paw." Bunny Cottontail had once burned his paw when he was reading by candlelight. "Hurrah!" the strange little rabbit cried. "I have a name, and I am like the teddy bears. I have come to stay." "Who are the teddy bears?" Bunny Cottontail asked. "We know all about the old bear Grandpa Grumbles, but we have never heard of the teddy bears." Then Bunny Cottontail Jr. cried out, "Where is my traveling bag? I must have my traveling bag. Somebody please find it, quick!" Bunny went out and looked in the snowdrift where Bunny Cottontail Jr. had been found, and there, sure enough, was a brown leather traveling bag. Bunny Cottontail Jr. opened the bag and took out a little teddy bear. Then he told Bunny and Susan that all the children liked teddy bears, and Bunny said, "We have lived in the woods so long that we don't know what is going on in the world." Then Susan got a blue ribbon and tied it around the teddy bear's neck. Suddenly, Bunny Cottontail Jr. said, "Show me Grandpa Grumbles, the big bear." Bunny Cottontail shook his head and laughed. "I can't show him to you tonight," he said. And Susan said, "I will get some cookies and then we will go to bed." So they all ate some cookies and then they went to bed. After Bunny and Susan had gone to bed, Bunny said, "Why doesn't that youngster put out his light?" Bunny Cottontail Jr. still had his candle burning. Susan crept out of bed and went on tiptoe to the door of the room where Bunny Cottontail Jr. was. What do you suppose that little rabbit was doing? He was reading by candlelight. "Ha ha!" cried Susan. "We have given you the right name sure enough. Bunny Cottontail always used to sit up late and read by candlelight." Bunny Cottontail Jr. looked rather ashamed, but all he said was, "Oh, my sore paw! How it does hurt!" Susan said, "You dear little fellow, I will take you into our room to sleep." So Susan took Bunny Cottontail Jr. into her arms and carried him into the other room. And she and Bunny went up into the garret and brought down a nice little crib. Bunny and Susan put the crib beside their large bed and laid Bunny Jr. in it. Then Bunny put out the light. "Now we will go to sleep," said he. But Bunny Cottontail Jr. sat bolt upright in bed. "What is that sound?" he said in a squeaky little voice. "I don't hear any sound," said Susan Cottontail. Still Bunny Cottontail Jr. sat up in bed. "I hear a sound. Yes, truly, I hear a sound," said he. "It is someone at the front door," said Susan. "Go down and see who is there." Bunny Cottontail Jr. jumped out of his crib and went downstairs as fast as his little legs could carry him. "He is a brave little fellow to go down in the dark," said Bunny Cottontail. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Bunny Cottontail Jr. by Laura Rountree Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Poor old Grandpa Grumbles is such a lonesome bear. No one likes to live with him. 'Tis sad, I do declare. Chapter 2. Bunny Cottontail Jr. opened the door, and there stood a big old bear. The old bear said, "It is a cold night to keep company waiting on the doorstep." "Will you come in?" asked Bunny Cottontail Jr. politely. The bear came in, and he shouted, "What is your name? Where are Bunny and Susan? It is too late to talk. Let us go to bed." He had shocking manners. Bunny Cottontail Jr. called Bunny and Susan. "Do come downstairs," he said. "We have a visitor." "Turn on the gas or light a candle," cried the bear. Then Bunny and Susan came downstairs in their dressing gowns. "Oh, ho!" cried Bunny. "What are you doing out at this hour of the night, Grandpa Grumbles?" Then the old bear began to grumble. "It's a lonesome business living all alone in the woods," he said. "A very lonesome business." Susan Cottontail had lighted a candle, and then Grandpa Grumbles caught sight of the teddy bear. "How do you do, sir?" he shouted. "How do you do?" The teddy bear sat perfectly still in the chair where Bunny Cottontail Jr. had put him. "Where is your tongue? Speak up, sir," shouted Grandpa Grumbles. Bunny Cottontail Jr. began to laugh, and he laughed until he cried. "He is only a make-believe bear, Grandpa Grumbles," said Susan. Then Grandpa Grumbles began to scold, but Bunny got him a rocking chair and made him sit down. "What brings you out so late?" Susan asked. Grandpa Grumbles carried a huge green cotton umbrella. He shook it now in a fierce way and said, "I tell you, it's a lonesome business living alone. My little rabbit friend went away, and there I sit all alone for breakfast, dinner, and supper. I think I will advertise for a boarder." "Will you come and live with us?" asked Susan, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "I like my own home," said Grandpa Grumbles. "You must find someone to stay with me." "Let us sleep on the matter," said Bunny Cottontail, and they all started for bed. "Very steep stairs for an old man," said Grandpa Grumbles. "Lean on my shoulder, I will help you," said Bunny Cottontail Jr. Bunny and Susan whispered to each other till very late that night, but Bunny Cottontail Jr. fell fast asleep at once. Next morning, Grandpa Grumbles woke early. "Somebody get my breakfast quick," he called. Then those dear little rabbits got up and got breakfast. Bunny Cottontail Jr. carried Grandpa Grumbles' breakfast up to him on a tray. "The coffee is too hot, and the toast is cold," said the old bear crossly. He was very rude. Bunny Cottontail Jr. said, "I should like to see your little house in the woods. I should like to visit you." "Too many visitors," shouted Grandpa Grumbles. "They all wish to visit me, but no one will stay." Bunny and Susan put on their thinking caps and thought hard all the morning. They were trying to think of someone who would live with Grandpa Grumbles. Bunny Cottontail Jr. was a clever little rabbit. He got dinner all by himself. He found a high chair in the dining room and he said, "Ho, ho! I shall have some fun." He put a chair at the table for Bunny and Susan, and a chair for Grandpa Grumbles, and one for himself. Then he put the high chair at the table, and in it put his teddy bear. When Bunny Cottontail and Susan and Grandpa Grumbles came out to dinner, they all set up a shout and cried, "See the teddy bear! See him sitting at the table!" Just then there was heard a crash, and Bushytail the fox jumped in through the window. Bunny Cottontail scolded and Grandpa grumbled, and Susan said under her breath, "I must hide my cookies." Bunny Cottontail Jr. sat very still in his chair. Then the most surprising thing happened. Bushytail caught sight of the teddy bear and he cried, "Oh, oh, oh! I don't like the looks of that stranger." Then Bushytail jumped out of the window and was gone. "He did not steal any cookies this time," said Susan. "He has broken my window again," said Bunny. Bunny Cottontail Jr. said, "3 cheers for my teddy bear." Then Grandpa Grumbles got up and cried, "Hurrah! Hurrah! I will have a teddy bear! I must have a teddy bear!" Then Bunny Cottontail and Susan and Bunny Jr. laughed and shouted, "Hurrah! Grandpa shall have a teddy bear!" "Where shall you get one?" asked Susan. Grandpa Grumbles shook his head sadly. "We will go to town and get you a teddy bear," Bunny Cottontail cried. So next day Bunny and Susan went to town to buy a teddy bear. That is to say, they started for town. They had to go through the woods to get there. Bunny Cottontail Jr. stayed at home to keep house. Grandpa Grumbles said he must go home. "I wish you could spend the day with me," said Bunny Cottontail Jr. Grandpa Grumbles shook his head and said, "How can I stay with you when there may be a mouse in my mouse trap? The mice will eat me out of house and home." So Grandpa Grumbles went home to see if there was a mouse in his mousetrap. "Don't let anyone in," Susan called to Bunny Jr. as she went down the road. "You have forgotten the broken window," said Bunny Cottontail. But Grandpa Grumbles had not forgotten the broken window. He came back that very day and put in a new glass. Then he said to Bunny Cottontail Jr., "Put your teddy bear in the window and Bushytail will not come in." So the teddy bear stood in the window and Bushytail did not come back that day. End of chapter 2. Chapter 3 of Bunny Cottontail Jr. by Laura Rountree Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. See the little teddy bears, they are bright, you know. With our friends the Cottontails, through the woods they go. Chapter 3. Bunny and Susan Cottontail went happily down the road until they came to the deep woods. "Oh, oh, oh!" cried Susan Cottontail. "I've hurt my ankle." Sure enough, she had hurt her ankle so she could not take another step. Bunny Cottontail was a clever rabbit. "Wait here, my dear," he said. "I shall soon be back." Now, where do you suppose Bunny Cottontail went? He went to a woodcutter's house and borrowed a wheelbarrow. When Susan Cottontail saw Bunny coming with the wheelbarrow, she laughed and said, "Oh, ho, so I am to have a ride." Bunny helped Susan into the wheelbarrow, and he wheeled her along through the woods. Suddenly he stopped short and began to whistle. "What's the matter?" asked Susan. "My fur and whiskers," said Bunny. "I believe we are lost." "What fun!" cried Susan. "I'm not a bit afraid." "But we are going to town to get a teddy bear for Grandpa Grumbles," said Bunny. Then he started on, and all day he wandered about in the woods trying to find the right road. At last it grew dark. Suddenly Susan sat straight up in the wheelbarrow and pointed ahead. "What is that?" she cried out. "It is a light," said Bunny. "Let us go on," said Susan. So they went on, and they soon came to the dearest little house in the world. There was a candle in one of the windows. Bunny left Susan in the wheelbarrow and went up to the door and knocked. And who do you suppose came to the door? 2 dear little bears, and they waved their paws, which meant for the visitors to come in. The little bears were real live teddy bears, and when Susan saw them, she was so surprised and delighted that she forgot all about her hurt ankle. She hopped out of the wheelbarrow and she and Bunny went into the little house. The teddy bears were so young that they had not yet learned to talk, but they could understand all that was said to them. "Will one of you go to live with Grandpa Grumbles?" Bunny asked. Both the teddy bears shook their heads. Whatever one bear did, the other did. Teddy Boy went and got Susan a plate of cookies, and Teddy Girl got Bunny a plate of cookies. Then Bunny Cottontail said, "It is getting late." "May we stay here tonight?" asked Susan. The little bears nodded their heads, and they took Bunny and Susan into the next room, where there were 2 beds. Then Susan and Bunny kissed the teddy bears good night, and the little bears trotted off to their own little beds. So they all went to sleep, and when they opened their eyes, it was morning. The 2 teddy bears got a fine breakfast, and Bunny and Susan enjoyed it, you may be sure. "Now, will you go home with us?" asked Susan when breakfast was over. This time the teddy bears nodded their heads, and Bunny Cottontail cried, "My fur and whiskers! What shall we do with the wheelbarrow?" "We will wheel the teddy bears in it, and you may take it back to its owner tomorrow," said Susan. So the teddy bears jumped into the wheelbarrow, and Bunny and Susan wheeled them home. Bunny Cottontail Jr. ran down the road to meet them. He hugged both the teddy bears at once, and he said to Bunny, Grandpa Grumbles has put new glass in the window, and he says he is tired waiting for you." When they got to the house, there stood Grandpa Grumbles, green cotton umbrella and all. When he saw that Bunny and Susan had brought 2 teddy bears, he shouted, "I will keep only one of them! I will keep only one of them! I cannot fill my house with teddy bears!" Then the teddy bears looked as though they would cry, for they did not wish to be separated. "No tears now, my fine fellows," Grandpa Grumbles said. "No tears. I can take you both for a while, but I may take you home any day." Susan said, "They are such dear little bears, Grandpa. I know you will wish to keep both of them." "We'll see," said Grandpa Grumbles. "We'll see. You never can tell. But no tears, my fine fellows, no tears." Then they all laughed, for Grandpa Grumbles was such a funny old bear. He always grumbled, no matter what happened. End of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of Bunny Cottontail Jr. by Laura Rountree Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Poor old Susan Cottontail will not speak a word. She has lost her spectacles. 'Tis really quite absurd. Chapter 4. Mr. and Mrs. Teddy Bear lived with their 2 children in the woods. They had gone away for a short visit, and when they got back, Teddy Boy and Teddy Girl were gone. Mr. Teddy Bear walked all around the house, and he said, "I do not see the print of their little feet." Of course, the little bears had not left the print of their feet around the house, for Bunny and Susan had taken them off in the wheelbarrow. Besides, it was snowing hard, and the snow had covered up even the tracks of the wheelbarrow. Mrs. Teddy Bear said, "Where can my dear little children be?" and began to cry. Just then Mr. Teddy Bear set up a shout. "Visitors have been here! Visitors have been here!" he cried. "How do you know?" asked Mrs. Teddy Bear. Mr. Teddy Bear did not answer a word, but he got up on a chair and waved a pair of spectacles to and fro. "They must belong to the person who has taken our little bears away," said Mrs. Teddy Bear. "We will go to see Mr. Owl," said Mr. Teddy Bear. "He is a wise old fellow. He will tell us where to look for our children." So Mr. and Mrs. Teddy Bear put on warm wraps and went out. In the meantime, Grandpa Grumbles had taken Teddy Boy and Teddy Girl home. They were so little that he carried them in his overcoat pocket. "It is pretty dark in this pocket," thought Teddy Boy. "It's pretty lonely here," thought Teddy Girl. But they did not say a word, for they were such little bears that they had not yet learned to talk. It happened that Grandpa Grumbles was thinking about that very thing. As he went along, he began to sing in a gruff voice, "Grandpa Grumbles in the woods has a house so wee, but there's room for Teddy Boy, Teddy Girl, and me. Your voices, my dear little bears, I think I should have heard. Now you are old enough to talk, your silence is absurd." Then what do you suppose those funny little bears did? They both tried to talk at the same time, and they found they could talk as well as anybody. They soon learned the nonsense rhyme that Grandpa Grumbles had made up. When they came to Grandpa's house, Teddy Boy said, "I am afraid to go in." And Teddy Girl said, "I am afraid to go in." For once, Grandpa Grumbles was just as pleasant as could be, and he talked so kindly to those 2 dear little bears that soon they were quite willing to go into his house. So he opened the door and took Teddy Boy and Teddy Girl in. He gave them each a little red rocking chair by the fire. He also gave them each a lump of sugar, and for a while they were as happy as could be. Then 2 great tears began to roll down Teddy Boy's cheeks, and Teddy Girl began to cry, "Boo-hoo! We wish to go home, they both sobbed. Then Grandpa Grumbles went and got them each an apple and said, "If you are good, I will tell you a story." But Teddy Girl and Teddy Boy made such a fuss that Grandpa could not tell a story. Teddy Boy said, "I want my ma." And Teddy Girl said, "I want my pa." And poor old Grandpa Grumbles did not know what to do. I suppose Teddy Boy and Teddy Girl would have kept on crying for an hour if something surprising had not happened. Suddenly a queer, foxy voice cried out, "Here I am in the kitchen, and supper is ready." And there at the kitchen door stood Bushytail, with a long calico apron on. He had a fine supper ready, but he would not sit down at the table himself. He served the supper. Grandpa Grumbles looked up from his plate only once, and then he said, "Bushytail, what made you think of this?" Bushytail looked cross-eyed. He always looked cross-eyed when he felt wicked. And he said, "I have an axe to grind." Do you know what Bushytail meant? He meant that there was something he wished Grandpa Grumbles to do for him. When they had finished supper, Teddy Boy and Teddy Girl ran to the front window, and what do you suppose they saw? Why, Mr. and Mrs. Teddy Bear coming along the path through the woods. Teddy Boy rapped on the window, and Mr. and Mrs. Teddy Bear turned and ran up the walk. In less than no time, they had those two dear little bears in their arms. "Take them home," growled Grandpa Grumbles. "Too many visitors." Then he waved his green cotton umbrella in a very fierce way. So all the teddy bears said, "Good evening," and went home. Bushytail looked cross-eyed again. Then he said, "You need company, and I need a home. Suppose I should live with you." Grandpa Grumbles shook Bushytail's paw, but he grumbled, "I don't believe you mean it, and I don't believe we shall get on together at all. But you may stay if you will work." End of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of Bunny Cottontail Jr. by Laura Rountree Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Now, little Bunny Cottontail, you'll find it a safe rule to leave old Bushytail alone, or he'll cry April Fool. Chapter 5. Susan Cottontail sat by the fire. She felt very sad, for she had no glasses. Poor Susan could hardly see at all without her glasses, so she sat by the fire and sighed. Bunny Cottontail said, "My dear Susan, where do you think you lost your glasses?" Susan shook her head. She felt too sad to speak. "Let me go and try to find your glasses," said Bunny Cottontail Jr. "I cannot remember being out of the house," said Susan at last. Then Bunny Cottontail Jr. cried, "Why, you went to get the teddy bears." And Susan said, "Why, sure enough, I went to get the teddy bears." Bunny Cottontail Jr. did not say another word. He just slipped out of the house very quietly and ran down the road. Where do you suppose he was going? He was going to ask the teddy bears if they had seen Susan Cottontail's glasses. Bunny Cottontail Jr. ran very fast, and he got out of breath, of course. So when he came to Grandpa Grumbles' house, he sat down on the doorstep to rest. Grandpa Grumbles happened to look out of the window, and he shouted, "Too many visitors. I will not invite you in." "I don't wish to come in," said Bunny Jr. "Grandma Susan Cottontail has lost her glasses, and I thought I'd ask the teddy bears if they had seen them." Just then Bushytail opened the door and ran out. He had a big bag of cookies in his paw. When Grandpa Grumbles saw that he was going to be left alone in the house, he changed his tune and called, "Come in, little Cottontail. The teddy bears have gone home, but come in and rest a while." Then Bunny Cottontail Jr. went in and talked to Grandpa Grumbles. He was so tired that he stayed till it grew very late. "You had better spend the night with me," said Grandpa Grumbles at last. "You can look for the glasses tomorrow." So Bunny Cottontail Jr. took a candle and went upstairs. Pretty soon he heard the patter, patter, patter of feet outside the house. He looked out of the window and saw Bushytail coming up the walk. Bushytail bounded into the house and shouted in a very loud voice, "I found Susan Cottontail's glasses! I found Susan Cottontail's glasses! And I am going to keep them. Do you hear?" "Oh ho!" thought Bunny Cottontail Jr. "We will see whether you keep poor Grandma Susan's glasses or not." "Poor Susan cannot see at all without her glasses," said Grandpa Grumbles. "I am going to keep them," shouted Bushytail. "If you say another word about it, I will break them in pieces." Grandpa Grumbles went upstairs to bed, scolding and grumbling all the way. Bushytail lay down on a rug by the fire, and soon they were all asleep. Very early next morning, the most surprising thing happened. The doorbell rang 3 times, and Bushytail went to the door, but there was no one there. Then the doorbell rang twice, and Grandpa Grumbles went to the door, and what do you suppose he saw? Teddy Boy and Teddy Girl standing on the doorstep. Teddy Boy wore a little blue coat and blue cap, and Teddy Girl wore a little red coat and red cap. Before Grandpa Grumbles could say a word, Teddy Boy jumped into one of his coat pockets, and Teddy Girl jumped into another coat pocket, and so they went into the house. And those funny little bears shouted, "Ma and Pa have gone away, and so we have come to stay with you, Grandpa." "Perhaps I shall go away too," said old Grandpa Grumbles, but he laughed when he said it. Bushytail looked cross-eyed, and he said, "Why don't you visit me? I have a nice home in the woods." But all that the little bears said was, "We are hungry." "Somebody get breakfast. It must be high time," shouted Grandpa Grumbles. Bushytail put on Susan Cottontail's glasses just for fun and began to get breakfast. And Grandpa Grumbles took off the teddy bears' coats and caps. When they sat down at the table, the little bears behaved quite badly. Teddy Boy said, "I don't like coffee," and Teddy Girl said, "I don't like tea." But Grandpa Grumbles was not a bit cross. He only laughed and said, "I believe even teddy bears can grumble." Grandpa always forgot to be cross when anyone else grumbled. "Oh, oh, oh!" shouted Bunny Cottontail Jr. just then. "See the butterfly? See the butterfly with yellow wings!" Now, of course, it was much too cold for butterflies, but no one thought of that. "Where? Where? Where?" they all shouted at once, and everybody jumped up from the table and ran to the window. Bunny Cottontail Jr. said, "Lend me those glasses, quick, so I can see better." So Bushytail gave Bunny Cottontail Jr. the glasses, and they all cried, "Show us the butterfly! Where is the butterfly?" And what do you suppose happened next? Bunny Cottontail Jr. ran out at the door and away, as fast as his little legs could carry him, and he had Susan's glasses held tight in his paw. "That sly little rabbit has played a trick on me," cried Bushytail. "Now I have a bone to pick with him. I meant to have some fun with those glasses, and I will yet." "Where on earth did you get Susan Cottontail's glasses?" asked Grandpa Grumbles. "Mr. Teddy Bear gave them to me," said Bushytail. He did not tell Grandpa that Mr. Teddy Bear had asked him to take the glasses to their owner. He just went on scolding about what Bunny Cottontail Jr. had done. Bushytail made such a noise that Grandpa Grumbles could not stand it. So he got the little red coat and cap and put them on Teddy Girl, and he got the little blue coat and cap and put them on Teddy Boy. Then he put those 2 dear little teddy bears on a sled and took them for a long ride through the woods. Bushytail was left alone, and he began to repeat poetry. This is the verse he said. "Now, little Bunny Cottontail, you'll find it a safe rule to leave old Bushytail alone, or he'll cry April Fool." Then Bushytail began to chuckle. He sat down in a chair and laughed aloud. He laughed so hard that he fell out of the chair. And what do you suppose amused him? He was thinking about some jokes he would play on April Fool's Day. And it was coming soon. "I will play a fine joke on Bunny Cottontail Jr.," Bushytail said. Bushytail was still laughing when Grandpa Grumbles and the teddy bears got home. Everybody was cheerful, for Grandpa had given Teddy Boy and Teddy Girl a fine ride. And those two little bears liked the sled so much that they sat on it all day long and played they were riding. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6 of Bunny Cottontail Jr. by Laura Rountree Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. "If I had my glasses, I could see quite well. Where I may have lost them, I really cannot tell." Chapter 6. Bunny Cottontail Jr. hurried homeward. He was so glad he had Susan Cottontail's glasses. "I wonder what trick Bushytail will play next," he said to himself. He had no sooner spoken than a voice said, "Bushytail is a sly old fox. Now he will have some fun. April Fool's Day is almost here, so Bunny had better run." Bushy Cottontail Jr. looked up. There, in a tree, sat Mr. Owl. "Hello, Mr. Owl," said he. "How do you happen to know so much about me?" Will you believe it? The owl did not answer. He pretended to be asleep. It was evening when Bunny Jr. got home, and the house was quite dark. He tried to open the door, but it was locked. Bunny Cottontail Jr. did not know what to make of this, so he sat down on the doorstep to think. Then he looked about, and there on the house he saw a big sign, "To Let." Then Bunny Cottontail Jr. began to cry. "What does this mean?" he sobbed. "Where are Grandpa Bunny and Grandma Susan? Where have they gone?" Just then the funniest thing happened. Bunny Cottontail stuck his head out of the window and called, "Is the skating good?" Then Bunny Jr. sat up straight and sobbed, "Oh, Grandpa, I'm so glad you were at home." Bunny Cottontail came down and let the little fellow in. And Bunny told Bunny Jr. that Susan was so put out about her glasses that she had gone to bed. She said she was as blind as a bat, and it made her feel 100 years old to be so blind. "Why did you put up that sign, 'To Let'?" asked Bunny Jr. "I heard that there was a famous eye doctor in the woods, and that he was looking for a house," said Bunny Cottontail. "I hoped he might see the sign and come here. Then Susan could get some new glasses." "Oh, let me pretend to be the eye doctor," said Bunny Jr. "What fun!" Bunny Cottontail and Bunny Cottontail Jr. whispered a long time together by the fire. First Bunny Cottontail would chuckle, and then Bunny Jr. would giggle. At last Susan woke up. "Who is in my house at this hour of the night?" she called down to Bunny. "It is an old friend of mine," he answered. "I am sorry we wakened you." Then Susan said, "If I had my glasses, I could see quite well. Where I may have lost them, I really cannot tell." Bunny Cottontail whispered something to Bunny Jr., and they crept upstairs and went quietly to bed. Early next morning, while Bunny was giving Susan her breakfast, there was a rap at the front door, and in walked a funny little creature. He had on a suit of green clothes and a green cap, and he carried a green bag. "I am the eye doctor," he said in a shrill little voice, "and I have come to rent this house." "Oh, oh, oh!" cried Susan. "Do give me a pair of glasses." The little eye doctor said, "I must see the house first. How can I fit glasses if I have no house to live in?" "Please help me," said Susan. "I am as blind as a bat today." Then the eye doctor put a pair of black glasses on Susan, and she said, "I cannot see at all." Then he tried some other glasses on her, and she said, "I see everything upside down." Then he put her own glasses on her, and she cried, "I can see everything in the room." I will rent this house tomorrow, said the eye doctor in his funny little voice. Show me all over the place now. Oh dear, we don't wish to rent our house, said Susan. But the eye doctor said he must have it, and Bunny took him all over the house. It is perfect, said the doctor. Every room is pleasant. I will move in tomorrow. Then he bowed politely and went away. Oh, oh, cried Susan. Bunny dear, why did you put up that sign to let? I knew it would get us into trouble. Never mind, said Bunny. We will go on a visit, my dear. So Bunny and Susan got out their traveling bags and packed. Next morning they were sitting by the fire talking. Bunny Cottontail said, You can see well now, Susan. Yes, Susan replied, but I don't wish to leave my own dear little home. Susan Cottontail was wiping her eyes when the most surprising thing happened. In came the eye doctor with a single bound. He took off his hat and coat and made a bow and said, Good morning. How did you like my joke? When Susan saw that the eye doctor was not a stranger but only Bunny Jr., she laughed until she cried. But where did you get the glasses you gave me? She said. They fit as well as my own. They are your own, laughed Bunny Jr. Then Bunny Jr. told the whole story, and he said, I wonder if Bushytail has forgotten that it is almost time to play April Fool jokes. I am afraid not, said Bunny Cottontail. He plays jokes on us all the year round. He will play a joke on me, I know, said Bunny Jr., because I played one on him. I am glad you did play one on him, cried Bunny Cottontail, for you got Susan's glasses back. Susan Cottontail said, Bunny dear, please don't put out any more signs. I was afraid we surely should have to rent our house this time. Then Bunny Cottontail laughed and said, I will take down the sign. He went out to take it down, and Bunny Jr. helped him. End of chapter 6. Chapter 7 of Bunny Cottontail Jr. by Laura Rountree Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Bushytail's a sly old fox. He never kept a rule. He likes to play some silly trick and then cry, April Fool! Chapter 7. April Fool's Day had come and was almost over. The Cottontails thought Bushytail had forgotten all about it. Evening came, and Bunny Cottontail cried, I hear wheels. Someone is out for a drive, said Susan. Bunny Cottontail Jr. clapped his little paws and cried, They are stopping here! They're stopping here! Sure enough, a big wagon, drawn by 2 horses, was stopping in front of the Cottontail's house. It was driven by a large, odd-looking rabbit whom the Cottontails never had seen before, and it was pretty well filled with animals. Bunny Cottontail and Susan and Bunny Jr. all ran to the front door. Hurry, hurry, get in, called the large, odd-looking rabbit. You are all invited to go for a drive and to take supper with me afterward. Hurry, hurry. Now, it seems strange to go for a drive and to take supper with a rabbit whom nobody knew. But the wagon was full of the Cottontail's friends. There were Grandpa Grumbles and the teddy bears and ever so many others, and they all seemed to be having such fun. So Bunny helped Susan into the wagon and hopped in after her. After him hopped Bunny Jr. The odd-looking rabbit cracked his whip, and off they went, and everything was as jolly as could be. The animals laughed and sang as they drove through the woods, and everybody was quite sorry when the odd-looking rabbit stopped his horses in front of a little house. Hurry, hurry, get out and go in, he cried. Hurry, hurry, for supper is all ready. I know it is, because I got it before I left home. So everyone got out of the wagon and went inside. Teddy Boy carried Grandpa Grumble's big green umbrella. My fur and whiskers, but it is cold for the 1st of April, cried Bunny Cottontail. That's why I have a fire in the stove, said the odd-looking rabbit. Hi-ho for the fire, they all shouted. What a nice coal stove. Then they all crowded around the stove. I don't feel a bit of heat, said Bunny Cottontail. But I see the fire, said Susan. I see the fire too, cried one after another of the animals. Then one of the teddy bears opened the door of the stove, and what do you suppose? There was a candle burning inside and no fire at all. The animals all laughed and shouted with glee. What a joke, they cried. Then they all sat down at the supper table, and the odd-looking rabbit said, Have some pudding, help yourselves. Grandpa Grumbles tried to help himself to pudding, but the spoon stuck fast in the dish, and he could not get it out. Then the other animals tried, one after another, but no one could get the spoon out. Then the odd-looking rabbit said, Have a cookie. Everyone must have a cookie. All the animals took cookies. The first one cried, It burns my mouth. And another one cried, It burns my mouth. And of course, the cookies burned their mouths, for they were full of red pepper. Just at that minute, the odd-looking rabbit made a bow, and off came his ears. He made another bow, and off came his head. Then he jumped out of the rabbit skin and stood before them, and they all shouted, Bushy Tail! April Fool! Cried Bushy Tail. Then he dashed through the window and was off and away before the party could say a word. Oh, ow! Cried Teddy Boy. I want my ma! Oh, ow! Cried Teddy Girl. I want my paw! For once, Grandpa Grumbles was the most cheerful one of the party. He said, April Fool's Day comes only once a year, my children, and now we must find our way home. Bunny Jr. said, The wagon is still hitched outside. Come to my house, cried Grandpa. Spend the evening with me. So they all scrambled back into the wagon and drove to Grandpa Grumble's house. When they got there, Grandpa said, Susan is a fine cook. She may go to the kitchen and make us something good. Susan went to the kitchen and made cookies for them all. I hope you didn't put in any pepper, cried Bunny, and they were very merry indeed. What should we do if Bushytail were to come in? Whispered Teddy Boy. I know what to do, said Bunny Cottontail Jr. Bushytail always jumps in at the window. Now what do you suppose that clever rabbit did? He got some of the other animals to help him get a big tub of water and put it in front of the window. And the very next minute, dash, splash, Bushytail jumped through the window and right into the tub of water. Bushytail choked and gasped. He scrambled out of the tub and the water streamed off his fur. He did not know what to make of it. I have come to the wrong house, I guess, he said, but I didn't know it was wash day. With that, he turned and jumped out through the window and was off. The other animals stuck their heads out at the window and shouted after him, April Fool! April Fool! But Bushytail didn't even turn around to shake his paw at them. Grandpa Grumbles laughed till he cried. This has been a fine April Fool's Day, he shouted. Bunny Cottontail cried, Bushytail played a good joke on us, but I think we played a better one on him. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8 of Bunny Cottontail Jr. by Laura Rountree Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. They said to little Snubbynose, For once, if you'll be good, you may join our party at a picnic in the wood. Chapter 8. One beautiful April day, Bunny Cottontail was wakened early. I hear footsteps on the front walk, he cried. I am getting as deaf as a post, Susan Cottontail said. I don't hear a sound. Then there came a rap on the door, and another, and Bunny Cottontail Jr. said, "Why will people rap and not use the doorbell? Shall I let the visitor in?" Bunny Cottontail drew himself up very tall and said, "We don't know whether we wish to let this visitor in or not. I will go to the door." So Bunny Cottontail put on his dressing gown and slippers and went downstairs. Thump, bump, he went, for his old slippers were much too large for him. When he opened the door, what do you suppose happened? The funniest little rabbit came in and jumped right upstairs 2 steps at a time. "Hello, Susan!" cried the little rabbit. "I am Snubbynose Jr." Then Bunny Cottontail said, "My fur and whiskers, how much you look like the real Snubbynose." Bunny Cottontail Jr. clasped his little paws together and cried, "Welcome, welcome!" The new rabbit ran and kissed Bunny Cottontail Jr. right on the tip of the nose. Then he jumped on a table and upset a glass of water and ran downstairs in less time than it takes to tell it. "He is the real Snubbynose all over again," said Susan. At breakfast, Bunny Cottontail said, "The weather is so fine we ought to have a picnic." "A picnic! A picnic!" little Snubbynose shouted. "May I go? May I go?" Just at this minute, Grandpa Grumbles came in. "What are you all so merry about?" he asked. "We are planning a picnic," Susan said. "But what shall we do if Bushytail wishes to go?" "I will take care of Bushytail," said Grandpa Grumbles. "You may depend on me." So the Cottontail family planned the picnic for next day, and they invited all their friends to go. Quite early the next morning, the animals met at the Cottontail's house. They all carried baskets, and everybody was very happy. The day was bright and pleasant, and the animals all sang songs as they walked through the woods. Soon they reached a beautiful spot, which they thought was just right for the picnic. It was beside a pretty little stream. "We had better begin to eat our lunch at once," said Bushy Cottontail. "Bushytail may turn up at any time and make us no end of trouble." Susan Cottontail spread a cloth on the grass, and all the animals opened their baskets and helped set the table. They were all ready to sit down when Snubbynose Jr. cried, "Where's Teddy Boy?" And Bunny Cottontail cried, "Where's Teddy Girl?" At that very minute a splash was heard, and Susan cried, "Oh, oh, oh! They have fallen into the water!" The whole company ran farther up the stream, and sure enough, Teddy Boy had fallen into the water, and Teddy Girl was trying to get him out. "Help! Help!" shouted Bunny Cottontail, and Old Grizzly jumped right into the water and caught Teddy Boy by his little red sweater and got him out of the water. Then everyone said, "Oh," and "Ah," and "Are you hurt, you dear little bear?" I suppose those animals would have talked an hour, but Snubbynose Jr. called out, "Luncheon is ready! Why not eat it?" Then they all scampered back to enjoy the picnic. Suddenly, a little squirrel began to chatter. Then a little rabbit began to scold, and soon all the animals were talking at once. Now, what do you suppose was the matter? The big cake they had for dessert was gone. "Who took the cake?" everybody asked. "It can't have been Bushytail," said someone, "for Grandpa Grumbles has him safely locked up in his house." Just the same, they could not find the cake. "The cake certainly is gone," said Susan Cottontail. At that moment, Snubbynose Jr. set up a shout. He pointed with his paw, and all the animals looked. There sat Teddy Boy and Teddy Girl on the big cake, and they were eating little bits of the frosting. No one thought of punishing the teddy bears, for they were so little they did not know any better. After the meal was over, the whole company recited verses and sang songs. Snubbynose Jr. said, "I know a little rabbit, his home is in the wood. He is not very naughty and not so very good." They all shouted, "That rabbit is Snubby-Nose Jr." Then Bunny Cottontail Jr. said, "There was a little rabbit who read by candlelight. He burned his paw but did not cry, for he was most polite." They all cried, "That was Bunny Cottontail Jr." And Susan said, "It is going to storm. We must hurry home." Sure enough, a big storm was coming up. They packed one basket full of the good things that were left over, and Bunny Cottontail said, "Who will leave this at Grandpa Grumble's house?" Every one of the animals shouted, "I will! I will!" At last it was decided that Teddy Boy and Teddy Girl should leave the basket, for they passed Grandpa Grumble's house on their way home. Then all the animals went merrily homeward. When Teddy Girl and Teddy Boy reached Grandpa Grumble's house, they set the basket down on the doorstep and peeped in at the window. They saw a strange sight. Bushytail was so angry to think he had not gone to the picnic that he was running up and down the room, lashing his beautiful tail. "Grandpa Grumbles," he shouted, "why didn't you let me go to the picnic? Why didn't you let me go to the picnic?" Grandpa Grumbles said, "You do not know how to behave at picnics, Bushytail. That is why I did not let you go." "I can behave as well as anyone," cried Bushytail. "But you never do behave well," said Grandpa. "You make trouble wherever you go." Then Bushytail lashed his tail and ran up and down some more. "I will not live with you," he shouted. "Beggars cannot be choosers," said Grandpa Grumbles. The two little teddy bears laughed softly and ran homeward through the woods. "Bushytail was caught in a trap that time," said Teddy Boy. "Just think," Teddy Girl said, "for once Grandpa Grumbles forgot to grumble." End of chapter 8. Chapter 9 of Bunny Cottontail Jr. by Laura Rountree Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Poor little Teddy Girl is shy, though she likes well to play, and she blushes when they cry, "Crown her Queen of the May." Chapter 9. Susan Cottontail was as busy as could be, and what do you suppose she was doing? She was washing and ironing and baking, for tomorrow would be the 1st of May. All the animals were going to have a party on May Day. Bunny Cottontail was so stiff with rheumatism that he said he could not walk to save his life. He said they must have the party in his yard, and all the animals promised to come. Bushytail came and set up the maypole. "How that fellow can work if he tries," said Grandpa Grumbles. All the animals were very merry, you may be sure, thinking about the 1st of May. Early next morning there was a knock at the Cottontail's door. Bunny Jr. went to the door, but no one was there. But what do you suppose was hanging on the doorknob? A beautiful May basket, and it was full of flowers. "I wonder who sent it," said Susan. Just then there was a great noise outside. "Oh, oh, oh!" cried Bunny Cottontail. "Let me get to the window, quick!" And Bunny Jr. ran out. Susan sat quite still in her straight-backed chair and said, "My dears, what is the matter? I am so deaf I cannot hear a fly buzz." "What do you suppose was the matter?" Grandpa Grumbles came running down the road. He was roaring and sneezing and waving his green cotton umbrella. He ran right into the Cottontail's house. "Bushytail did it!" he cried. "Bushytail did it!" And he sneezed again and again. They asked Grandpa Grumbles to tell all about it, but he only walked up and down and roared. And he waved his old green cotton umbrella and sneezed until Susan was frightened. Just at that minute, Bunny Cottontail began to sneeze. Then Susan began to sneeze, and Bunny Jr. sneezed too. At last, Grandpa Grumbles said between sneezes, "It's Pepper in my umbrella." With that, Bunny Jr. took the green cotton umbrella and started to run out of the house. "Oh, oh!" cried Grandpa Grumbles. "Bring back my umbrella! I say, bring back my umbrella!" So Bunny Cottontail Jr. shook the umbrella and brought it inside again. "Now," said Bunny Cottontail, wiping his eyes, "do tell us what has happened." Then Grandpa Grumbles said, "I found a May basket outside my door this morning, and it had fruit in it. Achoo! And I took a bite of the fruit, and achoo! How I sneezed! The fruit had red pepper in it. Then I put on my coat and cap, and they were full of red pepper, and my umbrella was full of it too." "Bushytail must have done it," said Susan. "It sounds like one of his jokes." "My fur and whiskers," said Bunny. "Where did he get so much red pepper?" "Perhaps he borrowed it from the neighbors," said Susan. Bunny Cottontail Jr. ran out of the room and soon came dancing back. He had Susan's pepper box in his hand, and it was empty. "I cannot go home," said Grandpa Grumbles. "Too much pepper." "Never mind, you may stay here," said Susan. Soon the other animals began to come to the party, and all of them brought baskets for a picnic luncheon. All the little rabbits and squirrels wore stiffly starched dresses. All the older ones wore new sunbonnets. They danced and sang for a while. Then someone asked, "Who shall be Queen of the May?" "Teddy Girl shall be Queen of the May," someone else answered, and all the animals cried, "Yes, yes!" Teddy Girl blushed away down deep under her fur. Teddy Boy led her to a seat beneath the old apple tree, and they crowned her Queen of the May. Then they had the maypole dance. But as they were about to unwind the ribbons, the maypole fell down, and they all scampered in every direction. Just then, they heard someone calling. They looked around and up and down. At last, someone pointed to the roof of the Cottontail's house. They all looked up, and there they saw Bushytail sitting, waving his tail. "Why didn't you ask me to your picnic?" he shouted. "What shall we do with that fellow?" said Susan. Grandpa Grumbles shook his umbrella at Bushytail, and Bushytail saw him. He was afraid of Grandpa on account of the trick he had played with the pepper. So he climbed down the water spout and ran away as fast as his legs could carry him. Then Grandpa Grumbles set up the maypole, and all the animals danced again and were very merry. They had a fine feast, and when they were ready to go home, they said, "Oh, Susan, we did enjoy the party so much," and, "Oh, Bunny, we hope you will invite us again." They gathered up their baskets and shook one another's paws and went home. Old Grizzly carried the little May Queen on his shoulder, and all the other animals shouted, "Hurrah for the Queen of the May!" Teddy Boy called, "Come on, Grandpa Grumbles, it is time to go home." Grandpa Grumbles shook his head sadly and waved his green cotton umbrella and said, "Too much pepper in my house. I cannot go home." Next morning, Grandpa Grumbles had a bad cold, and Susan said he must stay in bed. Then she put on her red sunbonnet and went out. All the animals were leaning over their fences talking to their neighbors. One said, "Poor Grandpa Grumbles, he's getting old." Another said, "Just think of his house being full of red pepper." So they talked, and when Susan came home, she nodded her head very wisely. But she did not tell even Bunny Cottontail what she was thinking about. End of chapter 9. Chapter 10 of Bunny Cottontail Jr. by Laura Rountree Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Bushytail has joined the band, all the rabbits cry. So they wave their paws and shout, Bushytail, goodbye. Chapter 10. All the good housewives among the animals got up very early next morning. They did not tell anyone where they were going. They all carried buckets and mops and brooms. Are you going fishing? Bunny Cottontail asked Susan. Susan laughed and shook her head. Bunny Cottontail Jr. said, You look as though you were going to join a circus. All day long the housewives passed Bunny Cottontail's house, and they all seemed to be in a great hurry. Some of the children went with their mothers. Where do you suppose the animals were going? They were going to clean house for Grandpa Grumbles. They went to his house and swept and mopped the floor and washed and scrubbed all day. No wonder he grumbles, said Susan. No one can see through these dirty windows. Just then little Pink Ears set up a shout. She had gone up to the garret, and there she saw a great big grab bag hanging on a nail. Her mother ran up, and she said to Pink Ears, You must not touch it. You must wait until you are invited to grab. Pink Ears said, I wish we might grab now. And even after they had all gone downstairs again, she kept teasing to grab. I don't know what they would have done with Pink Ears if Grandpa Grumbles himself had not come hobbling in. Bunny Cottontail was with him. Grandpa looked surprised. I am glad to see my friends, he said. Then he sat down on the sofa and cried, Whew! How clean the floors look! Whew! How clean the windows are! My fur and whiskers, Bunny Cottontail said. Your house does look clean. Then Pink Ears cried, Oh, Grandpa, may we grab from your old grab bag? Grandpa Grumbles laughed and chuckled and said, Up to the garret as fast as your legs can carry you. And everyone went up. Susan shall grab first, said Grandpa Grumbles. Susan put in her paw and drew out a long case. Open it, everyone cried. Open it and see what's inside. Susan opened the case and drew out a wonderful pair of spectacles. She put them on and said, I feel 40 years younger. Now I can see as well as anybody. Thank you, Grandpa Grumbles, thank you. Grandpa Grumbles said, Pink Ears may grab next. Pink Ears put in her paw and drew out a little cabbage made of candy. She made her prettiest bow and said, Thank you, Grandpa dear. Teddy Boy and Teddy Girl may grab together, said Grandpa Grumbles. They grabbed, and each got a pretty little cap. They put on their caps and went dancing around the garret. So the animals kept on grabbing, and everyone got a present. Then it was time to go home, and all the animals went away happy. Grandpa Grumbles called after them, Thank you for the surprise party and my nice clean house. Bunny Cottontail stayed at Grandpa's, and they had a long talk. At last Bunny said, I have been wondering all day what we could do with Bushytail. Really, something must be done with Bushytail. Grandpa Grumbles shook his head. I have been thinking about it all day too, he said. Just then, Grandpa and Bunny heard music. They ran to the door, and what do you think they saw? A circus procession was coming along right through the woods. There were black horses and white horses and little ponies and camels and elephants. And there was a clown, too. He was singing a song. At that moment, Bushytail came along all out of breath, and he ran up on the doorstep where Grandpa Grumbles and Bunny Cottontail stood. Just then, the fat old gentleman who owned the circus looked up, and the clown stopped singing. The horses stopped prancing too. In fact, the whole procession stopped right in front of Grandpa Grumbles' house. The fat old gentleman stepped up to Grandpa Grumbles and said, Beg pardon, that is a fine-looking fox. Can he do any tricks? Then Bunny Cottontail laughed until his sides nearly split, and Grandpa Grumbles nodded. Bushytail stood on his head and jumped up in the air. He grabbed Grandpa Grumble's old green cotton umbrella and held it over his head and went prancing about as though he were a fine lady. Then he grabbed the fat gentleman's cap and ran along beside the bandwagon and said, "Pennies, please." Then the fat old gentleman and all the people in the procession laughed until they cried. The fat old gentleman said, "He will do." It seems the fox that belonged to the circus had died, and the fat gentleman wanted a fox to travel with them. "No pleasure to show goods. If you see anything you don't want, ask for it," shouted Bushytail. The fat old gentleman was so pleased at this that he offered to pay $100 for Bushytail. But Grandpa Grumbles explained that Bushytail did not belong to anybody, and that all the other animals would be glad to get rid of him. So the fat gentleman put his money back into his pocket, and Bushytail ran and jumped up into the bandwagon. Bushytail began to beat time with his tail. One of the drummers gave him a little drum, and Bushytail beat that. "He is perfectly tame," shouted Grandpa Grumbles, "but he has no manners." "Be careful, or he will play tricks on you," called Bunny Cottontail. Then the circus procession moved on, and Bushytail rode away in the bandwagon in very grand style. When the last of the procession was out of sight, Grandpa Grumbles and Bunny Cottontail sat down on the doorstep and laughed until they cried. "Well," said Grandpa, "I really believe we have gotten rid of Bushytail at last." "Yes," said Bunny Cottontail, "and now I must go home and tell Susan what has happened." Bunny went home and told Susan, and Susan ran out and told all the neighbors. They all talked and talked about what had happened. And for all I know, the animals in the woods are talking about it yet. End of Chapter 10. End of Bunny Cottontail Jr. by Laura Rountree Smith.